John Schnitker from Santa Barbara. I have two short questions. Are there large and influential groups in world agriculture who are still in denial about climate change and who could impede this whole process? And secondly, what about animals? Not much was said about animal pollution this morning. Aren't they a big factor in this game too?
Thank you. And then right.
Hello. Rachel Bickford, USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, the New Technologies Division, and I recently returned from a tour as the Agricultural Attaché in South Africa. Dr. McKeesey, South African farmers have been enthusiastic adopters of modern agricultural biotechnology. What are your thoughts on the role this technology can play in addressing climate change? Actually, I'm interested in the entire panel's thoughts on this subject. Thank you.
Start up there, Siwa.
Well, yeah. Small farmers and large farmers in South Africa have been very much eager and looking, well, I don't want to use this word, but engaged in biotechnology. And well, they are telling us, and they've told us also that they are seeing some results into this, and also it's part also some of their contribution towards also adapting to this part of these as strategies. But also what I can say is one of the things which has been helpful. I'm talking about this because I know that coming from South Africa, this is controversial in terms of also on the location of where we are, because we've been also seen as the people who are eager and who are moving with biotechnology, especially BT cotton and all those things. But the thing also which we should realize is that we have been fortunate enough to have the framework, the regulatory framework. And with the regulatory framework, which other countries do not have, that's what also has helped those farmers also to adapting into those and also using biotechnology. And also, which I think also that's one of the things also which we should be talking about, of how strengthening capacity of those countries and how can we help our neighbors in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia and others also to realize the fruit of the gift of what we have in biotechnology, but with caution of also regulatory framework, because also that's not just a solution on itself as it is like that, but also it's part also of the contribution towards seeing how also we could react and also adopt into as we are saying that also the local adaptation. Also biotechnology has helped also in that sense also in as one of the strategies, locally strategies which you have adopted. I think mainly that's what I can say.
Thanks. Ian, do you want to?
Just combining a couple of the comments. I mean, the whole issue of the entire food chain has been raised a couple of times, and the issue of trade. I mean, I think this is important that we do look at this in its fullest sense. I mean, I've watched this whole debate over travel miles, etc., and been horrified by some of the stuff I've heard. And I really just urge people to do the calculations. Sometimes travel miles matter, carbon footprint. Other times they really do not matter quite so or anywhere near as much. Actually, I heard a very interesting presentation by the CEO of Stonyfield Yogurts, who are one of the first companies to go carbon neutral and done many other very way up in front steps in their business. But at one stage, they thought they were fearing a shortage of organic milk here in the US, so they had to looking at sourcing it from elsewhere. The best source they had, this is for dried powder, of course, was New Zealand. And they thought, well, there goes our carbon footprint. That blows it completely. But when they actually did the calculations, because of the differences in the way that dairy cows are raised in New Zealand, they have a much lower carbon footprint. Well, the Stonyfield would have much lower carbon footprint by importing all of the organic milk from New Zealand rather than getting it in the US. I mean, they're working on reducing the emissions in the US, which I think is the appropriate thing to do, but please do the numbers. And this is somewhat similar to Gerald's comment, I think, too. Get the data. We've got to base these things on the real facts, not on sort of gut feelings. And on gut feelings is another one, of course. There's a very interesting paper come out just recently looking at what would be the implications of the human population moving to a high meat ruminant diet versus vegetarian and several steps in between. And the emission differences are enormous. Just one other comment on the issue of getting the language into any Copenhagen agreement. I think this is critically important. I think we do need to have language in the Copenhagen agreement. I think we need to start thinking right now what that language will be. There are only limited options, I believe. We've got to start thinking about it. In the case of the red, it initially, and you might be able to correct me here, it was really little more than a statement to continue to consider the issue. Now, the Copenhagen document is going to be much more like Kyoto Protocol, so I think we have to think about how that's going to be, in terms of its sort of level of importance. But I think we have to work out just what we want. The first outlines of the text will start to appear in the coming week, and I think we need to monitor that very, very closely to get that text in.
Again, I will sort of give generic answers to several different kinds of questions. The livestock question, I think, is an interesting one because it brings up this whole issue of definitions. I mean, really, what do we mean by agriculture, and what do we mean by land use, and what do we mean by AFOLU and LULUCF? Is that, if I get that pronounced right, LULUCF? You know, I actually like the FAO definition of agriculture, which includes everything, right? So it includes livestock and forestry and fisheries, but unfortunately, the language of the negotiations has been done. So we kind of have to live with the language of the negotiations. Certainly, livestock is in part of our definition of agriculture, and we've talked a tiny bit in the brief about things like changing pastures and changing diets of animals to deal with methane emissions. This issue of trade, of course, is one that will be controversial, I think, for some time to come. I think we should distinguish, however, between increased trade flows and more open trade flows. Now, I'm going to give you the kind of the classic economist explanation for why we want more open trade flows, and it has to do with comparative advantage. Now, for those of you who have to sit through my or someone else's beginning economics class on comparative advantage, you know, sometimes we tried to be cute and use Spain and English wine versus, I can't even remember anymore what we used to trade in those examples. But underlying the comparative advantage was differences in resource endowments. Number one, all resources are scarce. We do not have unlimited resources of any kind, but it is the case that some resources locally are effectively free. And so what happens with development is that as humans grow and we became able to exploit more of the resource, those formerly free, effectively free resources become scarce in the context of how we're using them. What we see today is that there are a number of those resources that are becoming scarce, and we are beginning to find ways to do what humans eventually do, which is to run them through the marketplace. So the classic example in the case that we're talking about is the atmosphere and putting carbon into it, right? Who cared about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere when we were living in caves or when we were in the Middle Ages in Europe or any place else? It's only when we become large enough contributors to that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that it becomes a scarce resource that we need to think about putting a price on. So what we are essentially in the process now is figuring out a way to value that scarce resource. Whether we use cap and trade, whether we use a tax, that's really a mechanism about putting a value on that scarce resource. And what we're also doing, however, is assigning property rights, which is the other key part of what humans do as we start to use resources. How you assign property rights has a very important impact on welfare asset distribution. And so what we are implicitly doing in these negotiations, and sometimes it's useful to think explicitly about this, is we're creating property rights and we're giving those to somebody. So part of what the negotiations are about is this distribution of assets. Comparative advantage, that thing that all economists love, is about different allocations of resources in particular locations that you take advantage of. And so that by trading, you exploit the differences that exist. Did my mic get somebody? Nope, there it comes. You exploit the differences that exist in different places to make everybody better off. That's the famous outcome of comparative advantage. It only works when you have scarce resources. So what we're doing is beginning to put some scarce resources, in particular the atmosphere, but frankly there are other ones that we are effectively doing the same thing too. All of those things that we put under the category of environmental services are fundamentally free resources historically that we now need to begin to move into marketplaces, so we'll actually value their scarcity. As we do that, comparative advantage will change. Changes in ways of taking advantage of that comparative advantage will change as well. So no longer, when we talk about food miles, really what we are saying is that, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere used to be this free resource. We really didn't care. Now, when we put it in the marketplace, it will affect our comparative advantage. When it's in the marketplace, when we've actually valued carbon, then in that wonderful free market world of the economists, trade miles will be part of anybody's calculation as to whether or not they ship things around. So what we're in the process of doing is essentially moving those formerly free resources into the marketplace and trying to figure out how to make that happen in an equitable way. I'll stop with my economics lecture now.
Yeah, great. I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. I have one here and 2 in the back, and that's it. I'll try to get to you if we have time. Sorry. So we're right here. Try to keep them quick, please. Yeah. So,
yeah, I'll try to articulate this question because it's difficult. But getting back to the role of different farming systems in the global food system, and first of all, I'm uncomfortable with the sharp division between agriculture and forestry. And I think the agroforestry systems for food production are going to be an extremely important part of the future. And I want to understand the thinking on the tensions between how important these sort of large-scale staple crop production systems are going to ultimately be in feeding the growing population, or can some of that pressure, in which case the sort of adaptation, the mechanisms you're talking about, low tillage, all of these are really critical. But how much of that pressure can be taken off by integrated food production systems? So I just want to know what the thinking is from this panel of experts who thought so much about these issues.
yeah, there's 2 in the back.
Clive Mutunga from Population Action International. I would like to get a comment. In the past at the Copenhagen, I'd like to know what you take the impact of the national adaptation programs of action. I had a chance of looking at several of them, and they do have elements of adaptation in agriculture. So I would like to get your comment on how you look at them in terms of going forward, and also look at the new numbers, national mitigation actions, and other initiatives like the Nairobi Work Program going forward to Copenhagen. Thank you.
I'm Ruben Lubowski from the Environmental Defense Fund. I just wanted to ask for some more reactions to an earlier comment by Bill Hohenstein from USDA that agriculture is not just something that would be good to get into a global agreement, but it's something that actually could help facilitate and achieve the global agreement in the first place. So Ivo de Boer and others have talked about the need to have alternative docking stations or alternative ways that different countries could engage with a global agreement. RED is one example of this for the tropical countries. I'm wondering if agriculture could also similarly help engage other important sets of countries to actually get us to a global agreement. Thanks.
Thank you. And a final one right up here, and then we'll turn it for final comments from the panel.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, guys. So I guess my name's Colin O'Neill with the Center for Food Safety here in DC. And my question is surrounding the use the use of organic farming as a means of mitigating and adapting to climate change, citing strong reductions in petrochemical inputs, greater on-farm diversity, higher soil organic carbon levels, and ability to adapt to drought conditions easily spread to developing countries. Where does the panel see organic farming, in its advocation and investment in Copenhagen in climate talks in the future, and also the outcomes of that?
Thanks. Turn back around. Ian, you want to start this round again?
Okay. I won't comment in detail about agricultural forestry systems, agroforestry systems, other than to say we must do a lot more in that area, and in particular in relation to developing countries where the large extensive acreages, hectares or whatever, is not necessarily it doesn't play the same role as in economies of scale, etc. I think there's a huge option there. Just a slight sideline on that, and following on from Mark Kakwa's comments about what's going on in the bank, the workshop he referred to was actually where we were looking at bringing agricultural emissions into some of the carbon funds within the bank under the current rules, and that is looking at essentially saying agroforestry systems where the forestry barely meets the 10% requirement to make it a forest, but leaves 90% for agricultural lands, and that is a way of bringing things in. And this is one of the areas where we're not trying to thwart the system, we're simply trying to pioneer actions which would otherwise not get done. So I think that's one of the important roles that places like the bank, but many others can play. The point about, again, NAPAs, agriculture features very, very strongly in those, and there's a whole, of course, debate about why the NAPAs aren't moving forward and how to move them forward. But I think you touched upon one of the more important items, and that's the NAMAs. I didn't mention these earlier because the jargon's not around yet, but these are nationally appropriate mitigation activities. Yep, got it right. Okay, and I think this might be one of the places to get some text in associated with these NAMAs, if that's the way the negotiating text works. If we could see agriculture recognised clearly as one of the appropriate mitigation actions with a strong link back to the adaptation, that might be the entry point.
Yeah, maybe also what I would like to say also, which might also maybe contribute towards organic farming, which you're talking about. I could say that, effective mitigation measures depend on shifting agricultural practices, such as maybe as what we've been seeing also happening, switching from annual to perennial crop patterning, and also switching from also conventional fertilization to biodynamic farming. I think that also comes into that. And also on the system, on the systems also, I also hate in differentiating it also. I think that agroforestry is the way for future rather than forestry. And
well, once upon a time when I was still working at the University of Illinois, I sent this email to my dean. And Illinois is a very traditional Midwest place, right? And we grow a lot of corn and soybeans, and there's a lot of research done on corn and soybeans and not a lot else. And I sent this email to him saying, Dean Easter, I think that if we're not out of the business of doing research on corn and soybeans in 15 years, then we're wasting taxpayer money. And I say that for there's two reasons for that. One of them is that the private sector, of course, is doing a lot of research on exactly that topic. But as we think about climate change coming to Illinois, one outcome there was a great picture that showed Illinois moving essentially to Oklahoma in terms of the climate. And so when you think about what you're going to have to do in Illinois to deal with the Oklahoma climate of today in 50 years, you need to think about different kinds of cropping systems. The challenge, of course, is that it's really hard. I mean, the current systems that we use in the U.S., let's not talk about anywhere else for a moment. The current systems we use in the U.S. are, in some sense, locally adapted, and they're relatively easy to do. I mean, part of the whole thing about monoculture is that it's relatively easy to do And so if you think about making more complex systems that are also productive, it just is a heck of a lot harder, and you have to know a lot more. You know, these interactions between the bugs and the various plants and the time of the year and the soil. I mean, this is just not, this is, you know, approaching rocket science. Local knowledge that we have around the world, that local farmers have, it's not that they're rocket scientists, it's just that they've been experimenting with this stuff for an awfully long time till they kind of figured out the way to do things that work best for them and their particular agroecological systems. So there's a lot of embedded knowledge there that I think we need to take advantage of as we think about going around the world, because those people are going to face changes in their systems and in a relatively rapid way that they may not be able to adapt to, but there are other places around the world where they've adapted to the things that they're changing to so that they can gain from others and others can gain from what they've learned. So we need this large scale international data collection, I don't know what the right term is, but data collection system, information collection system or something like that. Now to come back to specifically to organic. My time's up, I got to quit. I'll just say one thing about organic. You know, we aren't going to be able to feed the world if everybody quits using nitrogenous fertilizer. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it than that. But it's also the case that there's places where we use way too much nitrogenous fertilizer relative to the needs for the systems. And if you do these more complicated systems, you probably need to use less chemical inputs. But it takes a lot more knowledge to do that. So we need that investment in that knowledge as well. One small final comment. When I was doing those pictures that shows, you know, the declines in yields, one of the sort of the other part of the cup half full thing is this situation that you know, technology change, varietal change and other things can actually move us forward in dealing with climate change as we go to the future. Sort of, in that case, Africa is perhaps in a better situation because they haven't actually taken advantage of some of the technology changes for a variety of reasons. And so we might actually find, if we think about regional effects of climate change, it might actually end up being more of a problem for Asia and less of a problem for Africa. Pure speculation at this moment. Thanks.